you walk into a room where millionaires are gathered, what do you notice? Not what they're wearing or what they order. Watch what they do with their proximity. They are obsessive about who stands next to them, who they have lunch with, who sits in their immediate orbit. Most people interpret this as arrogance or tribalism, but that misses everything. High earners understand something most of us don't. Proximity is not a social preference. It's economic infrastructure. This sounds strange because we've been taught the opposite story our entire lives. We're told that wealth comes from hard work, from talent, from discipline, from waking up early and grinding, and all of that matters. But here's what nobody tells you. Two people with identical work ethic, identical talent, and identical discipline can have completely different economic outcomes based on one factor: who they're closest to. The counterintuitive part isn't that proximity matters. The counterintuitive part is how much it matters. It's not a small advantage. It's not a nice to have. For most high earners, proximity is the primary driver of their wealth. Everything else is secondary. Think about this. Most people approach wealth like it's a test they can pass through individual effort. They study harder. They work longer hours. They optimize themselves. But successful people approach wealth like it's a game where the rules are different depending on which table you're sitting at. And the table you're sitting at is determined by who's closest to you. Most people miss this entirely. They see a successful person in their field and think, that person is smarter than me, or more talented, or luckier. But when you look closer, almost always, that person is orbiting a different circle. They're breathing different air. They're hearing different conversations. They're marinating in a completely different set of assumptions about what's possible. The assumption most people make is this: if I work harder and develop myself, opportunities will find me. But that's not how it works. Opportunities are not free-floating. They exist within circles. They exist within networks. They exist within proximity. If you're not in the right proximity, the hardest work in the world won't create the opportunities you need. Here's what changes when you see this. You stop optimizing yourself in isolation. You start optimizing your position within a system. A software engineer can spend a decade perfecting their craft in a mid-tier company. They'll get better, absolutely. But if the company's ceiling is X, their growth will be capped by that ceiling. Now move that same engineer into proximity with founders, venture capitalists, and scaling companies. Same talent, same work ethic, different proximity. Their opportunities multiply by 10x, not because they suddenly got better, but because they're breathing different air. But that assumption is wrong. The belief system most people operate with is this: I should focus on becoming so good that people have to hire me or work with me. It's seductive because it feels true. It feels like there's a merit-based system, and there is one. But it's not the primary system that determines wealth. The primary system is proximity. The people earning the most in almost every field are not necessarily the most talented. They're the most connected to the right people at the right altitudes. A mediocre strategist sitting next to a brilliant founder will have more influence over outcomes than a brilliant strategist sitting alone in a room. A decent investor in a circle of exceptional investors will make better decisions than a great investor in a circle of mediocre investors. This is not cynical. It's not unfair. It's just how information flows. It's how opportunity compounds. It's how human beings actually work. There is a principle that most people never see, and it explains all of this. It's not about luck. It's not about connections in the old-fashioned sense. It's about understanding how proximity shapes your reality. When you see this principle, everything changes about how you approach your career, your wealth, and your future. You stop asking, "How do I get better?" as your primary question. You start asking, "Who do I need to be closest to?" That single shift in perspective changes the trajectory of your life. And that's what we're going to explore in the next sections. not how to network better, not how to make more friends, but how to understand the invisible mechanism that makes high earners obsessive about who sits closest to them. By the end, you won't just understand why they do it, you'll understand why you need to do it too. Let's get specific about how this actually works. How does proximity literally shape your earning capacity? There are three mechanisms. Understanding them is the key to understanding why high earners are obsessive about who sits closest to them. First mechanism, information proximity. You do not earn money from information that is publicly available. If it's on the internet, on a podcast, in a book, everyone has access to it. That's not where high earners make their money. They make money from information that lives inside closed circles. Here's what this looks like. A real estate investor sits next to a capital partner who mentions offhand that a development is undergoing a rezoning. That information is not public yet. It will be in 6 months. But right now, it's only in the ears of people in that circle. The investor buys before the announcement. The land appreciates. They make 40% in 6 months. The mechanism is not intelligence. The mechanism is information proximity. This happens constantly. A technology founder sitting next to a successful acquirer learns what acquirers actually look for in companies. Not the public version of this, the real version. How they actually evaluate targets, what problems they're actually trying to solve. That founder builds their company with that knowledge baked in from day one. A competitor with equal intelligence but no proximity builds their company based on public information, which is often wrong or incomplete. Most people think information is evenly distributed. It's not. Information has a geography. It lives in circles, and you only access information that your proximity gives you access to. Second mechanism, opportunity proximity. Opportunities do not come from applying to job postings or filling out forms. Those are commoditized. Hundreds of people are applying. You're competing on credentials that everyone has. Real opportunities, the ones that actually change earnings, are distributed through proximity. They come from conversations, from being asked, from someone thinking of you because you're in their circle. A private equity executive needs to hire a CFO. Do they post on LinkedIn? Sometimes, but first they ask people in their circle. Do you know anyone? The job gets filled before it's ever public. The person who gets it didn't compete. They were simply in proximity to the right conversation. A startup is raising their Series A. The founder mentions to an investor they know casually that they're looking for a head of sales. That investor knows someone. A call happens. A hire happens. The entire opportunity was proximity-based. Someone not in that circle might be more qualified, but they're not in the conversation. They don't know the job exists. This is not corruption. This is how information actually flows in high-earning environments. Opportunities are not open. They're distributed through networks. And your network is determined by who's closest to you. Most people think opportunity is a function of preparation meeting chance. But that's only true if you're in proximity to where the chance shows up. Third mechanism, speed proximity. When you're close to people operating at a certain level, you internalize their decision-making speed, their risk tolerance, their standards. You don't have to think about it. You absorb it. A trader sitting next to senior traders notices something crucial. They make decisions faster. Not because they have less information, but because they've made similar decisions before. They've developed a pattern recognition system. They see a trade structure and they know instantly how it will behave. Slow traders are waiting for certainty. Fast traders are comfortable with 70% certainty because they've learned that waiting for 95% certainty means missing the opportunity window. The trader in that proximity learns to operate at that speed. They don't consciously think about it. They simply absorb the operating system. Their earning capacity increases not because they know more, but because they decide faster. A salesperson sitting next to a top performer notices something. She asks for bigger numbers. She does it casually. She doesn't overthink it. The salesperson in proximity learns that the number you ask for is not determined by logic. It's determined by what the person next to you is asking for. So they ask bigger. They get bigger. Their earnings increase. This is ambient learning. You don't choose it. You absorb it from proximity. These three mechanisms, information, opportunity, and speed, work together. They're invisible. They compound. And they explain why high earners are obsessive about proximity. Now here's what makes this pattern invisible. It operates the exact same way in every field, but people don't recognize it because they're looking for different explanations. In finance, it's obvious. The investor with access to other investors' deal flow sees 50 deals before making one investment. The investor without that proximity sees 5 deals and invests in one of them. The first investor has better deal quality, not because they're smarter, because they're in proximity to better information. In technology, it's the same mechanism, different context. A young engineer sitting next to a VP of engineering at a successful company learns how scaling decisions are made, how technical debt is managed, how to prioritize between speed and quality. That knowledge becomes baked into their DNA. They carry it forward. They become more valuable. But the knowledge itself lived in proximity. They didn't read it anywhere. They absorbed it. In business partnerships, the pattern repeats. An entrepreneur sitting next to people who have already scaled companies multiple times learns the death traps before hitting them. They know which problems kill companies and which are just friction. They make better decisions, faster. They avoid the mistakes that derail 90% of startups. That knowledge has a location. It lives in circles of experienced founders. If you're not in that proximity, you're learning through trial and error while they're learning through proximity. In sales, it's identical. A closer sitting next to top closers learns the psychology of negotiation through osmosis. They hear how objections are handled. They internalize the confidence required to ask for bigger commitments. They learn when to push and when to pull. None of this is written down. All of it is absorbed from proximity. Most people think these are separate domains with separate rules. They're not. The rule is the same everywhere. Your proximity determines your information, your opportunities, and your decision-making speed. The field doesn't matter. The mechanism is universal. But here's where it gets deeper. This pattern explains something most people struggle to understand: why successful people often seem to break the rules. They take bigger risks. They make faster decisions. They ask for more. They seem to operate by different logic. They do. But it's not because they're braver or crazier. It's because they're in proximity to different standards. When everyone around you is asking for 10x, you ask for 10x. It's normal to you. When everyone around you is making quick decisions with incomplete information, you do the same thing. You don't see it as risky. You see it as standard. This is how the world actually works from where you're standing. Someone from a different proximity looks at these same decisions and thinks, that's crazy, that's reckless, that's too aggressive. But they're not seeing the information advantage. They're not seeing the decision-making speed that comes from repetition. They're not seeing the opportunity density that makes big bets make sense. They're just seeing the surface behavior. Have you noticed successful people operate by different rules about this? They're not breaking rules. They're operating within a different information set. They have different data, different precedents, different ambient learning. This is crucial to understand because it means that individual effort is not the primary variable. Individual effort matters, yes, but it's being multiplied or divided by proximity. Take two people with identical talent and identical work ethic. One is in proximity to people earning 100K per year. One is in proximity to people earning 1M per year. 10 years later, guess who's earning more? The one in proximity to higher earners, not because they worked harder, but because their ambient standard was higher, their information was better, their opportunities were different, their decision-making speed was faster. The person in lower proximity circles will probably work harder. They'll optimize more, they'll perfect their skills more thoroughly, and they'll still earn less, because effort is being divided by their proximity limitations. This is not fair. It's also not fixable by working harder. The only variable that actually changes this equation is proximity. Moving to higher altitude circles, deliberately positioning yourself next to people who are operating at the level you want to reach. Most people think they can ignore this and compensate through talent or effort. They can't. I've watched it for years. The most talented people in low proximity circles plateau. The average people in high proximity circles soar. It's not because talent doesn't matter, it's because proximity matters more. There is a framework that explains why this happens, why proximity has this almost gravitational pull on your earning capacity, why high earners are so obsessive about it. It's not snobbery, it's strategy. It's understanding something fundamental about how human beings actually work. That's what we're moving into now, not just the pattern, but the psychology behind it, why your brain is actually wired to absorb your proximity, why you can't escape this force through willpower alone, why understanding this changes everything about how you approach your career and your future. You don't choose the beliefs you carry about what's possible. You absorb them. This is the fundamental psychology that explains why high earners are obsessive about proximity. It's not because they're exclusive or snobbish. It's because they understand that proximity shapes belief, and belief shapes behavior, and behavior shapes earnings. Let me explain the mechanism. Your brain is a pattern-matching machine. It is exquisitely designed to notice what's normal around you and assume that normal is true. If everyone around you drives a car, your brain assumes cars are the normal way to travel. If everyone around you has a college degree, your brain assumes a college degree is necessary to succeed. If everyone around you makes 60K per year, your brain assumes 60K per year is the natural ceiling for people like you. This happens without your conscious awareness. You don't sit down and think, my peers make 60K, therefore I should make 60K. It's far more subtle than that. Your brain simply absorbs the altitude of your circle as the altitude of possibility. The beliefs of your proximity become your beliefs, not through argument or logic, through ambient exposure. This is called ambient learning, and it's one of the most powerful forces shaping human behavior. Most people think beliefs are chosen through reasoning. You encounter an argument, you evaluate it, you decide whether to accept it. But that's only a fraction of how beliefs form. The majority of your belief system comes from ambient exposure to what's normal around you. A child grows up in a household where education is valued. Nobody has to convince them that education matters. They simply absorb it from the environment. The belief is embedded before they have the capacity to think about it logically. Decades later, when they're choosing a career, that belief is operating underneath their conscious decision-making. They don't realize it's a belief. They think it's truth. This is exactly how earnings beliefs form. You grow up around certain income levels. You see what's normal. Your brain calibrates to that as the possible. Years later, when you're earning, you're operating from that calibration. You're not consciously limiting yourself. You're simply operating from the beliefs your proximity installed. Most people miss this entirely. They think earnings are determined by how hard they try or how good they are. But a person can be remarkably good and still be operating from the belief ceiling of their proximity. They'll achieve success at their altitude, but they won't transcend it. because their brain is still calibrated to the possibilities it absorbed. A software developer grows up in a middle-class neighborhood where their parents both work corporate jobs. Success in that proximity means climbing the corporate ladder, making steady money, stability. That developer, no matter how talented, will tend to climb that ladder. They're not choosing it. They're operating from the belief system ambient to their proximity. But that assumption is wrong about what determines success in that person's life. Now move that same developer into proximity with founders and venture capitalists. Suddenly they're hearing conversations about scaling, about building equity, about creating something that doesn't require their direct labor. The belief system in that proximity is different. Success doesn't mean climbing a ladder. It means building something. That developer's talent didn't change. Their work ethic didn't change, but their beliefs about what's possible changed, and their behavior changed, and their earnings changed. The mechanism was not willpower or motivation. It was ambient learning. Here's what successful people understand. They can't think their way out of the beliefs their proximity installed. They can only move to a different proximity and let new beliefs be installed. They don't try to convince themselves they can earn 10x. They move next to people earning 10x. The belief installs naturally. No internal struggle, no self-help books required. Just proximity. This is why high earners are obsessive about who sits closest to them. They're not being exclusive. They're being strategic about which beliefs they want to absorb. There's a second layer to this psychology, and it's where the earnings gap actually widens. It's not just about beliefs, it's about decision patterns. Successful people don't just believe different things, they decide differently. And that difference in decision-making is a direct output of their proximity. Let me be specific. There are 4 decision patterns that separate high earners from everyone else, and all 4 of them come from proximity, not talent. Decision pattern 1. Optionality thinking. A person in high proximity circles makes decisions based on optionality. They're not trying to solve today's problem. They're trying to keep options open for tomorrow. They invest in relationships not because they need them now, but because they might need them later. They take jobs not for the title or salary, but because it puts them in proximity to interesting people and problems. They build skills that don't have immediate application, but might create options down the line. Someone from a lower proximity circle makes decisions based on immediate utility. Will this job pay me more now? Will this person help me with my current problem? Will this skill make me immediately better at what I'm doing today? The logic is sound, but it's optimizing for the present at the expense of the future. The optionality thinker makes decisions that look weird in the short term. They take lateral moves, they take pay cuts, they invest in relationships that seem irrelevant. But 5 years later, they've got 10x more options, more opportunities, more leverage. The person optimizing for today has optimized themselves into a corner. The difference is not intelligence, it's exposure. High earners have been in proximity to people thinking in optionality for so long that it's become their default. They've seen it work so many times that it's automatic. Decision pattern 2. Leverage thinking. Most people think about effort. How hard will I work? How much can I optimize? High earners think about leverage. How can I make this work without proportional effort? How can I get others to do work that creates value for me? This is not laziness. This is a completely different decision framework. A person optimizing effort will get better and better at their job. They'll work harder. They'll develop deeper skills. They'll become very good. They'll plateau at the ceiling of what their individual effort can create. A person optimizing leverage will build systems, hire people, create frameworks, build things that work without their direct involvement. Their earnings are not capped by their personal effort, they're multiplied by their leverage. The leverage thinker looks lazy to the effort optimizer. They're delegating more, they're working less directly, but their outputs are 10x higher. The mechanism is not harder work, it's different thinking. And this thinking comes directly from proximity. A person who has never seen leverage in action doesn't think about it. A person sitting next to people who build leverage systems absorbs that thinking. They start asking different questions. How do I build this so it works without me, instead of how do I get better at this? Decision pattern. 3. Abundance thinking. Someone in high proximity circles operates from abundance assumption. There is enough. There are more deals. There are more opportunities. They can take risks because there's another opportunity behind this one. They can share knowledge because knowledge is infinite. They can help competitors because the market is big enough for everyone. Someone optimizing from scarcity operates differently. If I take this risk, I might lose. If I share this knowledge, I'm giving away my advantage. If I help someone, I'm helping my competition. The logic is different. The comfort level with risk is different. The abundance person will take 10 risks, 2 fail, 8 succeed. Net, massive gains. The scarcity person will take 1 risk. They're terrified. They analyze endlessly. They take the risk so conservatively that the upside is minimal. Net, minimal gains. Again, this is not personality. This is proximity. A person surrounded by people operating from abundance sees risk differently. They internalize that abundance is real. They move faster. They take bigger swings. Decision pattern. 4. Reinvestment thinking. When high earners make money, they don't think about holding it. They think about what to do with it that creates more money. They reinvest. They compound. They ask, what's the next move that leverages what I've built? Someone from a lower proximity circle makes money and thinks about security. They want to hold it. They're risk-averse with their money because they had to fight hard to get it. They're not thinking about reinvestment. They're thinking about preservation. Mathematically, the difference is exponential. The reinvestor's wealth compounds. The preserver's wealth stays flat. 30 years later, there's a 100x gap. Not because one person worked harder, because they made different decisions. And all of these decisions come from the same source, the decision patterns they absorbed from their proximity. This is crucial because it means you can't think your way into high-earner decision-making. You can't read about optionality and suddenly start making optionality decisions. You can't understand leverage and suddenly become a leverage thinker. These patterns are absorbed through ambient exposure, not through intellectual understanding. You have to move your proximity. You have to sit next to people making these decisions and let your brain absorb the pattern. Then it becomes automatic. Then it becomes your default. That's why successful people are so obsessive about proximity. They know that changing their decisions requires changing their environment. They can't fix their thinking in isolation. They have to change who they're closest to. Here's where all of this converges into a single principle that explains everything. Successful people understand that their earning capacity is not a fixed trait. It's a function of their altitude. And altitude is determined by proximity. Think of it this way. Imagine you're in an airplane. The altitude you reach is not determined by how hard the engines try. It's determined by the air density around you. In thin air, you can go higher. In thick air, you're limited. Your earning capacity works the same way. It's not determined by how hard you work. It's determined by the economic air density of your proximity. And air density, in economic terms, is the quality of information, opportunities, and decision patterns flowing through your circle. A person in a circle where people earn 100K has a different air density than a person in a circle where people earn 1M. Not because one circle is smarter, because they're operating in different information environments, different opportunity environments, different decision-making environments. Most people think the answer to earning more is to work harder within their current circle. But they're trying to climb higher in thick air. The more they push, the more exhausted they get. They can climb slightly higher than their peers in that circle, but they can't escape the circle's altitude ceiling. The successful person asks a different question. What circle do I need to move into to operate in thinner air? This explains something that baffles most people. Why do some people who seem average end up earning massive amounts? And why do some people who seem exceptional plateau at ordinary earnings? It's not about their individual quality. It's about which altitude they're operating at. A mediocre person in a high-altitude circle gets exposed to better information. They see better opportunities. They absorb better decision patterns. Over time, they become exceptional. Not because they got better at their job, because their job itself changed through proximity. An exceptional person in a low-altitude circle stays locked in their circle's earning ceiling. They get better and better at what they do. They optimize more and more. But the circle itself doesn't expand. The air density doesn't change. So they stay at that altitude. This is not depressing, it's liberating, because it means you don't have to become a completely different person to earn more. You just have to move to a different altitude. But that's also why high earners are obsessive about proximity. They're not trying to collect friends. They're trying to manage their altitude. They know that proximity is the lever that moves everything else. Every relationship decision they make is filtered through one question. Does this proximity move me up, keep me level, or pull me down? They're not being cold about it. They're being strategic about their economics. And that leads directly to how this actually works in practice. Not the theory, the applied framework that changes how you make every relationship and positioning decision. Now I'm going to give you the framework that explains all of this. It's called the economic gravity model, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. The economic gravity model works like this. Every person exists at a certain economic altitude. That altitude is determined by the proximity they maintain. Just like gravity pulls physical objects toward the Earth's center, economic altitude pulls your earning capacity toward the median altitude of your circle. You don't have to do anything. The pull is automatic, it's passive, it's gravitational. If your circle's median altitude is 75K per year, you will tend toward 75K per year. Not because you're lazy or unmotivated, but because that's the altitude the gravity is pulling you toward. To earn 150K, you'd have to work against the gravitational pull of your circle. It's exhausting. Most people can't sustain it. If your circle's median altitude is 500K per year, you'll tend toward 500K per year. Same person, same work ethic, different gravity. The altitude pulls you up without extra effort. Here's the principle. Your earning capacity gravitates toward your proximity. This is why high earners are obsessive about who sits closest to them. They're not being snobbish, they're managing their gravitational pull. They know that if they let lower altitude people become their closest circle, the gravity will pull them down, even if they don't want it to. The model explains two very different paths to higher earnings. Path A. Optimize within your current altitude. You stay in your circle, you work harder, you get better at your craft, you climb the ladder within your current altitude, you go from 60K to 80K to 100K. You're successful within your circle, you're a high performer at your altitude, but you're still operating under the gravitational pull of that altitude. To go from 100K to 200K, you have to work exponentially harder. The gravity is pulling against you. Most people who try this path max out at 150K to 200K because the gravitational resistance becomes too strong. Path B, move to a higher altitude and optimize there. You change your proximity. You move into circles where the median altitude is 500K or 1M or higher. Initially, you might feel underpowered. You might not be the top performer. You're the new person. But now gravity is pulling you up instead of pulling you down. You don't have to work harder. You have to work differently. You absorb the decision patterns. You learn from better information. You see better opportunities. You operate at a higher altitude naturally, without fighting gravity. 5 years later, you're earning what the highest performers in your old circle earn in 10 years. Not because you're working harder, because you're operating in thinner air. Gravity is helping you instead of hurting you. The difference is exponential. Path A might take you from 60K to 150K over 10 years. Path B might take you from 60K to 500K over 10 years. Same person, different gravity. Why does Path B win? Because you're aligning with gravitational pull instead of working against it. Because information flows better at higher altitudes. Because the people around you have already solved the problems you're trying to solve. Because opportunity is denser. Because decision patterns are more sophisticated. Most people try to win at Path A. They think that if they just work hard enough, they can overcome gravity. They can't. Gravity is stronger than willpower. Successful people figured this out early. They stopped trying to optimize their way up within their circle. They started asking, what circle do I need to enter to change the gravitational pull? This changes how you approach every decision moving forward. You stop asking, is this person nice? Do I like them? You start asking, what is this person's altitude? What is their circle's median earning? If I spend significant time near this person, what gravitational pull am I exposing myself to? You stop asking, does this job pay more? You start asking, what altitude is this job at? Who will I be in proximity to? What gravitational pull will I be under? You stop asking, how do I get better at what I do? You start asking, what different circle do I need to enter so that what I do naturally operates at a higher altitude? This is the framework high earners are using. They're not thinking about it consciously all the time. They've absorbed it from their own proximity. But this is the operating model underneath their obsession with proximity. And once you understand this model, the application becomes clear. The question shifts from, why do they care so much about who's closest to them, to, how do I strategically engineer my own proximity to move my altitude? That's what we're moving into now. Not the theory, the practice. How to actually audit your current gravitational pull. How to identify the altitude you want to reach. How to engineer the proximity that makes that altitude your natural operating point. Everything we've discussed so far is the why. Now comes the how, and the how is where most people get stuck. Understanding that proximity determines altitude is valuable. But if you don't know how to actually engineer your proximity, the knowledge is useless. You'll just feel trapped by a system you can't change. So let me give you the practical framework. The way successful people actually architect their circle, the first step is diagnosis. You have to accurately assess your current gravitational pull. Not what you wish it was, not what you tell people it is, what it actually is. Here's how you do it. Make a list of the 10 people you spend the most time with or have the most influence over your thinking. Not who you like the most, who actually shapes your beliefs about what's possible. For each person, estimate their median earning. Not their salary if they're employed, their actual economic altitude. What are they earning annually across all sources? Now calculate the median of that list. That number is your current gravitational pull. That is the altitude you're operating at, whether you realize it or not. Most people do this exercise and realize they're being pulled toward an altitude lower than they want. They have a few high-altitude people in their life, but their primary circle is at a different altitude. The gravity is pulling them toward the median, not toward the exceptions. This is not criticism, it's just data. You're where you are because of the gravity you've been exposing yourself to. The second step is specification. You have to decide what altitude you actually want to operate at, not what sounds impressive. What do you actually want to earn? What do you actually want to create? This has to be specific, not, I want to be rich. That's vague. I want to earn 500K per year in the next 5 years. That's specific. That's something you can actually engineer toward. Now here's the critical part. You have to find circles operating at that altitude. This is where most people fail. They think networking means going to events and collecting business cards. That's not how it works. Circles operating at specific altitudes congregate in specific places. They invest in specific things. They consume specific information. They attend specific events. If you want to find people earning 500K per year, you don't go to general networking events. You look for where 500K earners actually congregate. This might be specific investment groups, specific conferences, specific online communities, specific mastermind groups, specific geographic locations. The location matters because proximity is literal. You have to physically or digitally be where the altitude you want to reach actually congregates. Most people miss this entirely. They try to network their way in from their current altitude. But people at higher altitudes don't spend time with people trying to climb. They spend time with people already at their altitude. They're not being exclusive. There's just no natural reason for them to interact with someone not at their level. So the entry point is not trying to befriend the high-altitude person directly. The entry point is finding the circle where people are climbing from your current altitude to the next altitude. That's where actual upward movement happens. Not at the top, on the way up. Let me show you what this actually looks like in practice, how successful people move into higher altitude circles. It's not what you think it is. A person wants to move from a 100K circle to a 500K circle. They can't just show up and belong. They have to enter through the climbing path. Here's what that looks like. They find a community or group where people are actively moving from 100K toward 500K. This might be a mastermind group, a specific online community, a professional association, a training program, an investor group, somewhere the transition is happening. They commit to it, not casually, seriously. They show up, they participate, they contribute. They build relationships with people also in the climbing phase. These are their entry point, not the people already at 500K. Here's the key part. They have to provide value at their current level. Most people try to provide value at the level they want to reach. They're not qualified yet. They're faking it. Successful people operate differently. They provide real value from where they are. They're helpful. They're useful. They're not trying to impress. They're trying to contribute. A person entering a 500K circle from a 100K background might not understand sophisticated investment strategies yet, but they might be excellent at operations, at relationships, at execution. So they provide that value. They become useful to the group. They become part of the circle naturally. As they spend time in that circle, something invisible happens. Their proximity shifts. They're now around people earning 500K. They're hearing the conversations. They're absorbing the decision patterns. They're learning the information that flows at that altitude. Slowly, they start to operate differently. Within 2 to 3 years of serious engagement, their earnings have moved toward 500K, not through luck, through proximity, through absorbing the altitude. But here's what most people get wrong about this process. They think it's about the people at the top. It's not. It's about the people in motion, the people climbing, the people actively transitioning from your altitude to the next altitude. Those are the people whose proximity will actually pull you up. Those are the people you can learn from in real time. Those are the people you have something to offer. The person already at 500K doesn't need your input. They don't need to explain things to you. You can learn from them, but the relationship is hierarchical. But a person also climbing from 100K to 500K, they're figuring it out in real time. They need collaborators. They need people to think with. You have something to offer them. The relationship is mutual. That's when real learning happens. Most people think proximity means getting access to people at the top, but that's not how proximity works. Proximity works through mutual contribution, through people in similar transition phases who are helping each other move up. Here's another layer. You have to let go of people pulling you down. This is the part that feels uncomfortable. As your proximity shifts upward, you'll notice that some of your previous circle doesn't fit anymore. They're operating at a different altitude. They're making different decisions. They're not trying to grow. They're trying to hold steady. Being in their proximity will pull you down. Most people handle this badly. They either stay in the old circle out of guilt and loyalty, which keeps them stuck, or they reject the old circle harshly, which damages relationships unnecessarily. Successful people do something different. They respect the old circle. They're grateful for what they learned there, but they gently reduce proximity. They spend less time there. They focus energy on the new climbing circle, not out of rudeness, out of strategy. They're managing their gravitational pull. This changes how you approach every relationship. You stop asking, do I want to be friends with this person? You start asking, what altitude is this person at? Is this proximity helping me move toward my target altitude or away from it? The person who doesn't make this calculation will get pulled in multiple directions. They'll have one friend pulling them toward 100K thinking, another pulling them toward 300K thinking. Their proximity will be confused. Their altitude will reflect that confusion. Successful people organize their relationships by altitude. They're not cold about it. They're strategic about it. Primary energy goes to climbing relationships. Maintenance energy goes to people they care about at lower altitudes. Zero energy goes to relationships that pull them down. This framework applies whether you're moving from 100K to 500K or from 500K to 5M. The mechanism is identical. Find the climbing circle. Provide value. Absorb the altitude. Let go of the gravitational pull working against you. Do this consistently for 3 years, and your altitude will shift. Not because you got lucky, because you engineered your proximity. Now let's look at what this actually looks like when someone implements this framework, because theory is only useful if it changes behavior. Here's an example from business. A software engineer is earning 120K at a mid-sized tech company. Her circle is mostly other engineers earning similar amounts. Her median proximity altitude is probably 130K. She's at the ceiling of her current circle. She does the diagnosis exercise. She realizes her closest circle is keeping her at 130K altitude. She decides she wants to reach 500K in 5 years. That's her specification. She starts looking for where people transitioning from 120K to 500K actually congregate. She finds a mastermind group specifically for technical founders and engineering leaders scaling companies. It's not free. It's not casual. It requires commitment. She joins. In that group, she's in proximity to people doing exactly what she wants to do. Some are already at 500K, some are in the climb. She meets someone building a technical startup who needs someone to lead engineering. She joins as an advisor, not an employee. She's providing value at her current level, technical expertise, but she's in proximity to someone operating at a different altitude. That relationship teaches her things her previous circle never discussed. How to think about equity, how to scale a team, how to make technical decisions from a business perspective, how to build systems that don't require her direct involvement. 2 years later, the startup scales. She becomes the VP of engineering. Her compensation changes, but more importantly, her altitude changed. She's now in proximity to founders, investors, and other VPs operating at 500K plus. Her decision patterns have shifted, her opportunities are different, her gravitational pull has moved. This is not exceptional. This is exactly how it works. Here's an example from sales. A salesperson is earning 180K at an enterprise software company. Her circle is other enterprise salespeople. Her median proximity is 200K. She's maxing out at her altitude. She wants to reach 800K. She recognizes that 800K earners in sales are usually not employees. They're usually equity holders, founders, equity partners, people operating at a different business model altitude. She finds a group of fractional CMOs and sales leaders who are building their own revenue generation businesses. She joins. Initially, she has nothing to offer, but she realizes she can help them with sales execution. She becomes valuable to that circle. Over the next 3 years, she learns how to build recurring revenue, how to sell differently when you have equity upside, how to think about lifetime value instead of quarterly targets. She meets someone building a SaaS company who brings her in as a revenue partner. She takes a lower base salary, but significant equity. 5 years later, the company has built value. Her altitude is now 1M+, not from working harder at her old job, from moving to a circle operating at a different altitude entirely. This pattern repeats across every field. The mechanism is the same. Diagnosis, specification, finding the climbing circle, providing value, absorbing the altitude, moving forward. Here's what most people miss. This is not networking. This is not relationship building in the traditional sense. This is strategic altitude management. The practical shift is this. You stop thinking about proximity as social. You start thinking about it as economic infrastructure. Every relationship decision gets evaluated differently. Not, will this person be a good friend, but what altitude is this person operating at? Do they help me move toward my target altitude or pull me away from it? This sounds cold. It's not. It's actually the most respectful way to manage relationships. You're being honest about what you need. You're organizing your energy strategically. You're not pretending to be someone you're not. Here's the implementation framework. Step 1, diagnosis. Identify your 10 closest proximity people. Calculate their median altitude. That's your gravitational pull right now. Step 2, specification. Define the altitude you want to operate at. Be specific, be realistic, pick a 5-year target. Step 3, reconnaissance. Find where people actively climbing toward your target altitude congregate. These are communities, groups, masterminds, professional organizations, geographic locations, online spaces. Invest time finding the right group. Step 4, entry. Join at your current level. Provide real value. Don't fake competence. Contribute from where you actually are. Step 5, absorption. Show up consistently. Listen, learn. Let the altitude rub off on you. This takes time, years, not months. Step 6, release. Gently reduce proximity with people pulling you toward a lower altitude, not harshly, strategically. Maintain relationships, but reduce their gravitational pull. Step 7, ascend. As you absorb the new altitude, new circles naturally become available. You're invited to higher circles. You're considered for opportunities at higher levels. You're operating at the altitude now, not climbing toward it. The cycle repeats if you want to go higher. Most people try to skip steps. They want step 1, knowing where they are, and step 5, being part of a high-altitude group, without steps 2, 3, and 4. They want the result without the process. It doesn't work that way. You have to actually enter the climbing circles. You have to actually provide value. You have to actually spend time absorbing the altitude. There's no shortcut, but there's also no mystery. The process is clear. The results are predictable. This is why high earners are obsessive about proximity. They're not being exclusive. They're being systematic. They know that this process works. They've either experienced it themselves or watched it happen dozens of times. They know that your altitude is determined by your proximity, so they manage it carefully. You came into this with a question. Why do successful people obsess over who sits closest to them? Now you know. It's not snobbery. It's not ego. It's strategy. They understand something most people never learn. Your proximity is not a luxury. It's the primary lever that moves every other variable in your life. Your beliefs about what's possible, your decision patterns, your access to information, your speed of execution, your earning capacity, all of it gravitates toward the median altitude of your closest circle. You can't willpower your way out of this. You can't outwork it. You can't think yourself into a higher altitude if your proximity is holding you at a lower one. The gravity is too strong. But here's what successful people also know. You can move your proximity. You don't have to stay in the circle that raised you. You don't have to accept the gravitational pull you inherited. You don't have to plateau where your current altitude suggests you will. You have one lever that actually works, and it's the one you control, who you choose to be closest to. The three insights we've covered, the hidden pattern of information, opportunity and speed, the psychology of ambient learning and belief absorption, and the practical framework for engineering your altitude. These are not theory. They're the operating system that determines whether someone reaches their potential or stays stuck. Successful people didn't discover some secret talent. They discovered proximity. They learned that changing who sits closest to them changes what they believe is possible, what decisions they make, what opportunities they see, what they ultimately earn. You now have the diagnosis tool, the specification process, the reconnaissance framework, the entry strategy, the absorption timeline, the release protocol. You know exactly what to do. The question is not whether this works, it works. The question is whether you'll do it, because it requires something most people don't want to give, the willingness to enter uncomfortable circles, to provide value before you feel you deserve to be there, to let go of people and places that feel safe, to move into thinner air where you can grow. But when you do, everything changes, not because you got better at what you do, but because who you are standing next to finally changed what's possible for you. That's the invisible edge that high earners see.